Hey, what's up, world? It's your boy G Shrimp, everybody favorite baby daddy, voice of the street, man. And today we finna be in California with it, y'all. I'm finna introduce y'all to a gay Hoover, y'all. One who took advantage of all of his own gang, y'all, sexually. And I'm talking about, they say he was a stumped down gangster. And when you got reputation like that, y'all, people be scared of you already from what you did on the street. They know you put work in jail. So when they put them young boys in their cell, they be scared to death. And they just give it to them because they scared. They don't think about fighting or none of that. Bro, listen, I got to die. You feel me? They had a little joke in the penitentiary, y'all. They used to say this: blood on my knife or shit on my dick. And I used to always say, because, they would say it to each other, look, joking. You know, I heard somebody say, I said, shit, if a nigga think he go get shit on his dick, he got to get blood on his knife fucking with me, bro. And I mean that. You feel me? Ain't no way. I don't give a fuck if you was big as Shaquille O'Neal. You couldn't get none without killing me, bro. Ain't no way, man. But anyway, man, hit that like button, y'all. Subscribe to the channel, and let's get right into it, y'all. Check this story here.
Down the tier like smoke drifting through shadows. Everybody already knew what
Let me back it up.
the cell door slammed like thunder, and the whispers spread down the tier like smoke drifting through shadows. Everybody already knew what was about to go down, but nobody wanted to move or even breathe. One youngster froze in the corner while Fat Rat stared him down with that slow smirk that never looked friendly. There was never a fair one when Fat Rat smelled weakness, because fear was the tool he used better than any blade or gun. This story right here is not some movie script cooked up in Hollywood. This is the real life of Michael Fat Rat Allen, a Hoover OG who ended up terrifying his enemies and, even worse, his own homies. South Central Los Angeles during the 70s and 80s was a battlefield shaped by poverty, layoffs, and broken schools. Factories that once gave steady paychecks shut down and left entire families struggling without options or support. When crack cocaine hit the blocks, the streets went from rough to devastating almost overnight, with kids growing up faster than they ever should have. Hoover territory stretched across long strips of Figueroa.
Hey, y'all see I got my Rosecrans shirt on, right? I have to mention that, man. Check my shirt out, man. Check my shirt out, man. Listen. Shout out to Big Zoo, man, from Bumpton, baby. He came to Chicago and brought me this here, man. And shout out his wife, Ronnie. She from Compton and he from Bumpton, y'all. And if y'all up there, y'all already know why. You dig? That's what they say. Free Suge Knight and rest in peace, Easy E. That should let you know we dealing with the red and the blue team, y'all. You feel me?
And dipped into neighborhoods already burning with violence. Figueroa became a name tied not just to the gang, but also to sex work, drug spots, and bloody shootouts between rival crews. People hustled where they could, but the Hoovers marked their ground with fear and brutal enforcement. Michael Allen was born in 1972, raised in the middle of all this chaos. Folks say he had that heavy frame even as a kid, short but stocky, the kind who moved quick through alleys when things turned hot. That's where the nickname Fat Rat came from, since he was always hard to shake when he wanted to be around the older homies. His family ties ran deep into South Central sets. He had brothers linked with Hoover sets and cousins tied to the family Swan Bloods, meaning whichever way he moved, the street was already saw their brothers carry pistols like lunch bags, and knew survival meant picking sides before someone else picked it for you. Growing up in that type of environment built something different in Michael Allen. Those corners molded him into someone who did not see danger the way regular kids did. For most young boys, the street was a place to play basketball or ride bikes, but for Fat Rat, it became a classroom where every lesson was survival. That foundation would shape the man who later turned fear into a weapon against both enemies and his own people. By the mid 80s, Fat Rat was already hovering close around the Hoover OGs. He was still a teenager, but older homies recognized how quick he absorbed the code and how little he cared about consequences. His presence was heavy without him even saying much, because he rarely smiled and kept that same tight look that made younger kids nervous. It was around this time that Cleman Big Evil Johnson was running heavy with the family Swan Bloods. Big Evil carried one of the darkest reputations in Los Angeles, considered one of the most dangerous figures during that era. Michael Allen got close to him and moved as a partner, making that connection even more notorious because of how violent both men were considered. People in the neighborhood said Fat Rat never needed to talk much because his size and his silence did the work for him. He did not joke around like other teenagers. He did not hang just to hang, and he gave off an energy that was always tense. That is what drew Big Evil to him, because intimidation was worth more than words when the streets demanded loyalty. The memoir Monster by Sanika Shakur, also known as Monster Cody, even mentioned an OG Fat Rat from Hoover in prison settings. The way Monster described it, Fat Rat was already feared inside, showing he had built that reputation early. For a Hoover member to stand out in that world of violence meant he had already done work that other inmates respected or feared. On the outside, stories spread about robberies and assaults where his name floated, even before he reached 20. He was the one who handled discipline for his set, meaning younger members who stepped out of line got reminders from Fat Rat himself. That reputation stuck to him quickly because it was not about being loud or flashy. It was about making sure his set never doubted his willingness to enforce rules with violence. Those early steps into gang life showed exactly who Fat Rat was becoming. He was quiet but ruthless, already aligning with one of the most feared men in South Central, and shaping himself into the enforcer who would later carry one of the most twisted reputations the Hoovers had ever seen. By the mid-80s, the Hoovers had already shifted from their early Crip identity into something different and unpredictable. Their sets had grown strong across South Central, stretching along Figueroa and running deep into the West Side. The Hoovers had once rolled tight with other Crip factions, but after years of internal disputes, they broke away and carved their own lane. That breakaway meant the Hoovers were not scared to work with whoever brought money or power, even rival Bloods, when the moment called. The streets whispered about strange alliances, and the family Swan Bloods became one of the closest connections. Their turf sat close to Hoover territory, and the crack economy pushed both groups into money together. The crack era had reshaped South Central, filling corners with smoke, addicts, and dealers stacking fast profits. Every block turned into contested ground, and shootouts became a daily reality across Los Angeles. The LAPD reported hundreds of killings tied to Hoover sets and their rivals during those years. Cleman Big Evil Johnson came up as one of the most feared Swan Bloods of that generation. Court records later called him Los Angeles' most dangerous man, and even law enforcement spoke of him with hesitation. His name carried weight inside and outside jail walls, and homies described him as ruthless with no hesitation. Michael Fat Rat Allen stood right next to Big Evil through much of that time. Sources described him as the quiet enforcer who moved like Big Evil's shadow and never questioned orders. When punishments needed to be handed out, Rat made sure no one forgot who controlled those blocks. Stories on the street painted him as the one who checked younger Hoover members that got reckless. People said he beat homies bloody if they broke rules, keeping discipline inside the gang through raw fear. His reputation grew because he never raised his voice, but he always delivered violence when it was expected. That partnership between a Swan leader and a Hoover OG showed how complicated gang politics were during the crack years. Money and power erased old colors when survival demanded protection, and Fat Rat's loyalty kept him tied close to Big Evil. Homies in South Central already feared crossing the wrong set, but now they also feared discipline inside their own ranks. Fat Rat carried that role heavy, making sure nobody stepped out of line without consequences. His presence created an atmosphere where silence spoke louder than any yelling could. This stage of his life showed how Michael Allen built the foundation of his legend. He was not just another Hoover soldier on the block, he was the man who handled order through intimidation and violence. In the crack-soaked world of South Central, that role made him one of the most feared figures alive. By the early 1990s, South Central Los Angeles was drowning under non-stop shootings and bloody retaliation cycles. The crack economy was pumping money into every block, but it also fueled violent turf wars that never cooled down. Bodies dropped almost every day, and neighborhoods turned into hunting grounds where nobody felt safe anymore. On April 17, 1991, the violence reached a different level on the corner of 108th Street and Western Avenue. Gary Barawat and Donald Ray Ewing were standing at a car wash, a spot many locals used as a hangout. Out of nowhere, a van pulled up slowly, and then the side door slid open. Witnesses later told police that two shooters leaned out with automatic weapons and opened fire without hesitation. The bullets flew across the pavement, striking Barawat and Ewing multiple times before they could even react. Both men collapsed right there at the car wash, and the scene looked like something out of a war zone. The shooters never shouted, never threatened. They just sprayed the area like professionals finishing a contract. The van then sped away, leaving bodies on the ground and shocked witnesses frozen in silence. It didn't take long for police to start piecing together what happened that afternoon. Word on the streets was that Cleman Big Evil Johnson and Michael Fat Rat Allen had been involved. People whispered that Johnson had bragged about the murders in conversations, and Allen was always seen close by him. Detectives began to suspect the two men were part of a coordinated hit meant to send a message. The investigation stretched into 1992, and eventually police made their move with arrests. Johnson and Allen were both taken into custody, and the charges stacked heavy. Prosecutors painted them as not just gang members, but leaders responsible for orchestrating calculated killings across Los Angeles. During searches tied to Johnson's home, authorities claimed they found multiple firearms that matched casings from the car wash murders. Forensics work connected the weapons to the shootings, and investigators leaned on that evidence to build their case. Witnesses also came forward, some of them flipping under pressure, pointing fingers directly at Johnson and Allen. Inside the courtrooms, the atmosphere was thick with fear and intimidation. Allen sat quiet through most proceedings, but his presence carried menace. He never needed to speak loudly because even prosecutors admitted jurors watched him with unease. The way he carried himself told everyone he was not worried about consequences. He stared. His silence almost worked like a weapon because people believed he was reminding them that snitching carried real consequences. By 1997, the verdict came down, and both men were convicted of murder. The judge sentenced Cleman Big Evil Johnson and Michael Fat Rat Allen to death. Reporters in the courtroom noted that the two men laughed when the sentence was read, as if prison and even death row meant nothing. Their reaction shocked families of the victims, but for those who knew their reputations, it only confirmed their image. That conviction locked their names into Los Angeles history as two of the most feared figures of the crack era. Johnson became the face of the Swan Bloods, in news stories, while Allen's name carried as the Hoover enforcer who backed him. The car wash killings became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case, showing the cold professionalism of gang violence in the early 1990s. The trial painted Allen not just as another Hoover soldier, but as Big Evil's lieutenant. Prosecutors made it clear that Allen carried out discipline and stood close during major hits. The courtroom testimony and forensic evidence built an image of Fat Rat as someone who never questioned orders and executed violence like it was routine. In the end, the car wash murders revealed how dangerous the Hoover and Swan alliance really was. Together, they had pulled off a daytime double homicide in front of witnesses and still walked around with confidence until the arrest came. For South Central residents, the killings were another reminder that the war wasn't slowing down and the streets would remain a battlefield. Michael Fat Rat Allen left that trial with his reputation cemented in fear. He was no longer just a whispered name around Figueroa or prison yards. He was officially branded in court records as a killer tied to Big Evil. His silence in those years only deepened the mystery around him, making the legend grow beyond the actual evidence. Once Fat Rat's name was locked in court files, the streets started writing their own versions of his story. Gossip rolled through South Central that he was responsible for more than a dozen killings. Some people whispered about him carrying out paid hits for hustlers who wanted rivals gone. Others tied his name to disappearances where bodies never turned up and families never found closure. None of those stories were ever proven in paperwork, but his name floated heavy over them all. The truth mattered less than the legend because in the hood, reputations always stretched beyond official records. Homies and enemies alike spoke his name with the same mixture of fear and respect. The streets did not need convictions or written evidence to keep the story alive. They remembered the looks, the beatdowns, the whispers, and they repeated them until the tales grew larger than the man himself. People would say Fat Rat's name rang out loud, meaning you could mention him in any section and somebody knew the rumors. What made that legacy so different was how it carried weight even after his death sentence. Most men faded behind the walls once the system buried them in concrete and bars. Fat Rat somehow managed to stay alive in stories that kept spreading through both Hoover sets and rival cliques. He became one of those figures who represented something darker than gunplay, a warning about how far fear could stretch. Still, the most disturbing part of his story did not come from bodies in alleys or shootouts on corners. His most twisted reputation grew inside the jails and prisons where homies whispered about things that left scars no paperwork ever recorded. Once Fat Rat landed inside the California jail system, his reputation took a darker shape that followed him forever. Monster Cody's memoir, Monster gives one of the most chilling descriptions of what Fat Rat was known for behind bars. In the book, Monster remembered a night when Fat Rat's cellmate, a young homie named BT, was laid out hog-tied in the cell. Fat Rat had stripped him, tied him up, urinated on him, and was preparing to rape him while the other inmates watched from their doors. Monster Cody described how he rushed into the cell and intervened before the act could go further. He wrote that Fat Rat didn't panic or run when Monster appeared. Instead, he moved slowly and with full control, showing how comfortable he was in that moment. The scene showed exactly what made Fat Rat different. He used fear and humiliation as weapons inside those walls, and he was confident enough to do it openly. That incident was not some isolated moment because transcripts and street accounts painted a bigger picture. The Hoovers carried a reputation for sexual abuse in jail during the late 80s, and Fat Rat's name sat at the center of it. Younger homies often spoke in low voices about being targeted by him if they showed any weakness. He became infamous for preying on his own people, not enemies, but the youngsters and smaller men who could not defend themselves. Stories spread about how he forced homies to do humiliating things just to keep his approval. Some said he made them wash his clothes by hand, braid his perm straight, and clean his cell floor while he stood watching. Others remember times when he made younger inmates eat soap or perform degrading tasks while older prisoners laughed. These acts were not about money or survival, they were about domination and breaking people down. Rumors also suggested that Fat Rat molested younger Hoovers during put-ons, the initiation process where members proved themselves to the set. In some tales, youngsters were cornered and forced into sexual acts that left them scarred and silent. These rumors spread fast, and even though there was no paperwork proving it, the whispers carried as much weight as facts. In prison culture, once a story caught, it became a warning, and Fat Rat's name always carried that warning. There were also claims that Fat Rat kept what inmates called a prison girlfriend. Some accounts said it was a white inmate he turned into a submissive partner, controlling him the same way he controlled younger black inmates. The stories described him walking the tier with that man trailing behind him, a display of power in front of everybody. Whether the details were all true or not, the legend built on itself, and it made him feared in a way few gangsters ever were. Part of what gave those stories power was his physical appearance. Fat Rat was not some small man hiding behind words. He was a big presence. He carried a heavy stomach but buffed arms, and he kept a perm that made him stand out on the tier. Other inmates remembered how he filled doorways when he stood there, his arms folded, staring down anyone who dared to make eye contact. That look alone could silence a pod, because people believed he might turn on them next. Inmates also said Fat Rat charged rent for cell space. If someone weak ended up near him, they had to pay in food, commissary, or service just to be left alone. If they refused, he turned violent and used humiliation until they submitted. That system gave him power even over men who were not part of his set, because nobody wanted to be targeted as his next victim. The disturbing part of Fat Rat's legend was that his violence no longer revolved around outside enemies. Inside those walls, he built fear by turning his own homies into victims. It flipped the normal gang rules upside down, because loyalty usually kept members safe from each other. With Fat Rat, loyalty did not guarantee safety, because even his own brothers in the gang whispered about avoiding his attention. The transcript of the Notorious Booty Bandit collected these stories with detail, showing how his legend spread beyond single incidents. Younger Hoover members spoke about hiding from him, some refusing to be housed anywhere near his cell. His name became a warning whispered in county jails and prisons across the state. When a new Hoover came in, older inmates sometimes warned them, "Stay out of Fat Rat's sight." This part of his story stood as the climax of his reputation, because it was different from the usual gangster myth. Most street legends come from shootouts, robberies, or drug empires. Fat Rat's story carried those elements, but his true infamy came from the fear he created inside cells. He was remembered less for battles against rivals and more for humiliating his own people when they were vulnerable. Those prison years defined him as something beyond a regular enforcer. They painted him as a man who weaponized sexual violence to control his environment. That reputation did not fade after his conviction, because homies kept passing the stories down like cautionary tales. Whether every detail was fact or not, his name carried the weight of terror, and that weight shaped how generations of Hoovers spoke about him. The climax of Fat Rat's legend was not the car wash murders or his ties with Big Evil. It was the whispered stories of what he did behind bars, stories that turned him into a symbol of the darkest side of gang life. His legend lived strongest not in shootouts or courtroom trials, but in the nightmares of the men who had to live on the same tier with him. After the 1997 conviction, Michael Fat Rat Allen and Cleman Big Evil Johnson were both sent to death row. They waited while automatic appeals worked their way slowly through California's heavy legal system. For years, nothing seemed to move until 2011, when the California Supreme Court finally gave them a lifeline. The justices overturned the convictions, ruling that the trial court had excluded a confession that should have been considered. They also criticized the use of a jailhouse informant whose testimony was unreliable and damaging. The court's decision sent the case back for a new trial, ordering that both men should face the charges again. Prosecutors did not take that loss lightly, and they attempted to file new charges against both defendants. They claimed the fresh charges were tied to evidence that had not been used in the original trial. The defense argued that this move was vindictive and designed to punish them for winning the appeal. The judge agreed, dismissing those additional charges and leaving only the original murder counts for a retrial. That legal battle kept Fat Rat and Big Evil stuck in county jail rather than San Quentin's death row. They were transferred back to Los Angeles County facilities, placed in limbo while prosecutors prepared for retrial. During that time, they ruled the tier like veterans, using intimidation to control both younger inmates and rivals. Even though their convictions were technically overturned, the stories about their reputations followed them into every pod. Fat Rat still walked with the same heavy body and sharp stare, and few dared to challenge him. The legal limbo dragged on for years, highlighting how California's death penalty system functioned in slow motion. Decades passed with no clear closure for victims' families or for the accused men. Appeals, retrials, and endless delays kept them locked in cages while paperwork moved slower than time itself. Fat Rat grew older inside those walls, his reputation still intact, but his body carrying the weight of age and confinement. He lived his final decade under the shadow of a case that refused to reach an end. On February 6, 2022, Michael Fat Rat Allen was found unresponsive inside Los Angeles County's Men's Central Jail. He was 49 years old at the time of his death. Official reports listed cardiac arrest as the cause, with no immediate signs of foul play. Still, inside the jail system, rumors traveled fast, and many speculated that his death was not natural. Some whispered that he had been poisoned, while others claimed it was an overdose. None of those stories were ever proven, but in the culture of jailhouses, rumors often held their own weight. What made the timing notable was that Allen died before facing his retrial. Legally, because his conviction had been overturned in 2011, he was still presumed innocent of the 1991 car wash murders. That fact created an unusual situation. A man once sentenced to death for 2 killings passed away without a final judgment. For his family, it was both painful and complicated, because the official record no longer carried a completed conviction. For law enforcement and prosecutors, his death closed the door on a case that had already stretched 3 decades. Reactions from the community reflected the split views people held about him. Rivals and enemies called his death a form of street justice, saying the cycle had finally caught up to him. Some spoke about the fear he spread in both the neighborhood and inside jail, and they said few would mourn his passing. On the other side, his family hoped his story would carry lessons for the younger generation. They wanted people to see his life as a warning about the streets and the cages waiting at the end. The irony of his story is how quietly it ended compared to the violence of his life. For decades, Michael Allen lived as a figure of terror, feared inside neighborhoods and prisons across Los Angeles. Yet in the end, there was no shootout, no riot, and no final act of violence. He slipped away inside a cell, leaving behind a story remembered more for whispers than for paperwork. His death marked the close of a chapter that began in South Central's cracked streets and ended in silence behind bars. Michael Fat Rat Allen's story stands apart from most gang legends that came out of South Central. Many names are remembered for shootouts, for drug empires, or for battles against rivals, but his reputation carried something different. The myths around him always exaggerated his body count, with whispers of a dozen or more killings tied to his name. Still, those stories never defined him as much as the way he turned violence inward against his own. Within gang culture, being remembered as a booty bandit is both fearsome and shameful at the same time. It created a strange legacy because people both feared his name and mocked it behind closed doors. Even Monster Cody used Fat Rat as an example of how sexual violence shaped prison hierarchies. His story became a reminder that brutality did not always mean bullets and guns. Sometimes it meant humiliation and fear behind locked doors. Fat Rat's life reflects a darker side of Los Angeles gang history, one that usually stays hidden beneath the surface. His story shows how power and intimidation can twist loyalty and brotherhood into something else entirely. He remains a name passed through whispers, not just for killings, but for the way he terrorized his own homies.
Now tell me what y'all think about that, man. Would y'all let him do y'all like that? Play y'all like that because he a big guy? Hey, it is what it is, man. You know, y'all should be ashamed of y'allself, LA. God damn it, y'all should have been had somebody stab that nigga. Somebody should have been stabbed that nigga to train him. One stab straight in the heart. You supposed to taught the littlest nigga on the deck how to do it. That's it. Y'all let him take advantage of them brothers for years like that? Shame on y'all, bro. Shame on y'all. I wouldn't do it. I'd be the littlest motherfucker. I'd be like, I'll talk to the nigga. Shit. I bet he ain't gonna fuck nobody else. Because we go cut that dick off. That's what we go do. Y'all hold that nigga down. Swoop! Nah, nigga, booty bandit, take that and stick it up his ass, nigga. Matter of fact, and go stick it in his mouth and go on cut his throat, stab him in the heart. Fuck it, get it all over with. Yeah, just make a mess. Make a mess in the whole cell. God damn it. Some of y'all didn't know I was crazy, but it is what it is, man. Anyway, man, that's the story, man, of the famous booty bandit from LA, man, the Hoover Fat Rat. The famous Fat Rat, y'all. I'm out of here.